During this time of year, we find ourselves kind of in between feast seasons, don't we? I don't know about you, but sometimes it feels a bit like a spiritual lull. At least it can be for me. You know, I've already started to forget my favorite message I heard at the feast. You know, we've just come out of the holiday season for much of the world that we've sort of been, battling mentally during that time of year. And, even just physically, I just feel like I'm in hibernation mode, even though it's not that cold for this winter this year. I feel like, I just want to hunker down and just, wait for winter to sort of... What is that? There we go. Can you still hear? I thought it was like someone was breathing heavy. Sorry. But, I don't know if anyone else feels that way, but have you ever found yourself, especially this time of year, feeling like you're kind of in a spiritual rut? You ever felt that? Perhaps you've lost some of your study and prayer habits. You're not doing it as much as you could be. You're just kind of drained. Maybe you have been studying something and you're not finding really meaningful, impactful Bible study. Have you ever found yourself in a place like that? Perhaps you even feel a little bit weak in your faith. What happens? What happens when we get stuck? It doesn't feel good. It doesn't feel good to sort of be in a rut. We know that we should be in a better place. We know that, I should be growing. I have God's Spirit. It should be my number one priority. But we find ourselves sort of repeating the same patterns over and over. You ever felt that way? I have 3 points today for this time in the sermonette for getting out of a spiritual rut. Now, this isn't so we get down on ourselves, because if you really think about it, we have signed up for a journey, a lifelong journey. And our journey is likened that to a race. And it's not a short race. It's a distance run. So there's going to be times in our lives where we feel a bit weary. And that's sort of what a rut can feel like, We feel like we're going over the same track over and over and over, the same part of the race. And we don't want to become stagnant. It's not a place where we want to stay. Even though we know it's probably a natural part of our growth process, we want to move past this spiritual rut. Every time you think of the word stagnant, it's mostly has to do with stagnant water. And stagnant water doesn't produce, desirable fruit. So that's why we want to get out of the spiritual rut. Many times these periods are born out of, difficult life stages or, situations that we're already going in or mentally are taking up a lot of space in our lives. New stresses, new life stages that we may have come across. And that's sort of sometimes where these spiritual ruts can come out, be born out of. Number 1, coming out of a spiritual rut, do something different. Do something different. Break the mold. You're stuck because you've been kind of doing the same thing for a while. It's time to mix it up. We're called to be doers of the word, and that's true. But God expects us to take action steps in our own spiritual growth. He wants us to do something. He's not going to give us some sort of just religious experience to shake us up out of our rut. We have to do something different. We're called to be doers of the word, and that's what we're supposed to do. We're supposed to do something. Our Christian lives are not a passive thing. We are active Christians. For example, read a different version of the Bible. Perhaps you have been, reading your King James Bible for the last 10 years, and, you want to try to mix it up a bit. Try reading a different version. See if you can get something else out of it. For me, after we had Harry, I really struggled with finding the right time for my own Bible study. And so what I did was actually, we moved the alarm clock to the other side of the room. And it's the alarm clock with the snooze button. I don't know about you, but if I have the snooze button right next to me, forget it. I'm hitting it. I'm hitting it every time. So the alarm is down on the other side, and I have just a little watch that rings, at 6:25 every morning, and there's no snooze button. I hit it, And then it's like, there's your moment of choice. You either get up or, you're going to be late for everything else in the day. That's something physically different that I had to change to sort of get out of the rut I was in. Write out a prayer. Write it out on paper. We have to do something. You have to take action. We cannot accept inaction. Like I said, God's just not going to give us a religious experience to shake us out. Do something. Take action. A lot of times when I find myself in a spiritual rut or any sort of situation we get into, we'll say, well, what kind of examples can I read in the Bible? And a lot of times you'll look and you'll see, okay, like for example, Joseph. Joseph was sold by his brothers, and then he was, charged by Potiphar's wife, and he was thrown in prison. And you sort of see these things that happen, but what was the inner workings that he was going through? You kind of don't see it. You see the end, and he tells his brothers, that, it was all meant for good. But what was, there had to have been a day-to-day where he was battling and going through it. So then, for me, my process is like, well, that's why he's a hero of faith, and I'm not. I'm just, Rudy Rangel. So we look at these, and we maybe can get discouraged. But I want to come back to that, because there are some places that we can look to. But number one, start by doing something else. Anything. Do something different. Number two, to get out of a spiritual rut, fast. Reestablish a strong connection with God by humbling yourself before Him. Let's go to Matthew. Matthew 9. Matthew 9, verse 14. Then the disciples of John came to Jesus, to him, saying, "Why do we and the Pharisees fast often, but your disciples do not fast?" And Jesus said to them, "Can the friends of the bridegroom mourn as long as the bridegroom is with them? But the days will come when the bridegroom will be taken away from them, and they will fast." The apostles weren't fasting because fasting draws us closer to God. And at that time, they were as close to God as they could be. They were learning directly from Jesus Christ. But we need to take time to fast, to draw close to God, to reestablish that connection. A lot of times, our spiritual rut could be born out of, our relationship with God and where it's at that moment. For me, it's always like a reset button. Things seem to be going out of control, and then I finally set aside and take a day of fasting. And along with that comes prayer, but a day that's just sort of reset everything else. And realigning priorities reestablishes my relationship with God and my main priorities in life. And along with fasting, always comes with prayer. So when we're fasting on that day, talk to God. Talk about the areas where you really feel weak. God, I study your word, and I feel like that I am just reading the same thing over and over, and I'm not getting anything out of it. Help me to learn to apply the things that I'm reading. Talk to God very deliberately about what you are going through. Ask for strength, ask for guidance, and ask for clarity of what's going on in your life. So number two, to get out of a spiritual rut is fast. Number three, talk with a friend about it. Satan would like to pick us off one at a time, especially when we're weak. When Satan is likened to that of a roaring lion, anytime you see a lion on Nat Geo, he's picking off the weak one. A lion picks off the weak one who's, maybe a little sickly, and that's where he makes his move. Many of us are vulnerable when we're sort of alone in that way. And when we're going through a spiritual rut, we don't want to be alone. Many support group programs to overcome addictions are successful, and a lot of it has to do with the sort of village mentality or the group ability to encourage and be a support. Let's go to Ecclesiastes. This is a scripture that I read a long time ago and almost forgot it existed. But Ecclesiastes 4, and it's a beautiful scripture about friendship. Ecclesiastes 4, and I'd like to read it actually out of the New Living Translation. Starting in verse 9, Ecclesiastes 4, verse 9, 2 people are better off than one, for they can help each other succeed. If one person falls, the other can reach out and help, but someone who falls alone is in real trouble. Likewise, two people lying close together can keep each other warm, but how can one be warm alone? Verse 12, a person standing alone can be attacked and defeated, but two can stand back to back and conquer. Three are even better, for a triple braided cord is not easily broken. You know, finding yourself in a spiritual rut, it's usually not easy to talk about, especially with each other, because we all sort of want to know, hey, we're all succeeding. But there are moments in our lives where, we could do a little better. And it's not easy to talk about those things. But we're supposed to be because we're supposed to be, sort of all in our journey. Everything we should be doing should be prioritizing, our faith first. But there are times when it's very difficult. So we shouldn't look at each other as like, oh, what are they going to think about me? We should look at each other like, this person can really be there for me when I am not at the strongest point I could be. It's a blessing to have each other. Judy and I have been here 6 years, and I was just thinking recently, if I was to move to another city just for a job, and I didn't have a church sort of network, how difficult and lonely that would be. Judy's met a few people, at the park and said, well, we moved to Cincinnati and, we don't really know anybody. And I couldn't imagine not having some sort of network of support because you do need it. It's hard to stand alone, as it says here in Ecclesiastes. It's hard. It's better when something goes wrong or you need some sort of support that you have somewhere to turn to. And that's what's great about having a church family. And we should lean on each other for that. And ask them to pray for you. Ask them to pray for you as well. If you find yourselves in one of these spiritual ruts, you're not alone. You're not alone. A friend will be able to confirm that you're not alone and be able to be a good support to you. Being stuck in a rut can be very discouraging. Ruts develop from, going over and over and over the same path over and over again, doesn't it? And spiritually, we can find ourselves in that place too. Earlier I said you don't really get the inner workings of some of those biblical heroes. You see, they just sort of, seems like they just powered right through it, came on the other side of the trial as a champion. But the Psalms, we do have the Psalms. And it's fantastic to read the Psalms because David was very, very open and very honest about some of the areas where, he was struggling with, trials that he was struggling with. When you find yourself in a spiritual rut, the Psalms is a good place to turn to. They're very insightful on what someone else was also going through during a rough period of their life. Let's go back to Psalm 40. Psalm 40, and David was in a moment in his life where he was looking to God. Psalm 40, verse 1, I waited patiently for the Lord, and he inclined to me and heard my cry. He also brought me up out of a horrible pit and out of the miry clay and set my feet upon a rock and established my steps. God doesn't want you stuck. He doesn't want you stuck in the same place, going over the same spiritual routine over and over. He wants you to grow. And it's interesting, when you read this, it feels very personal. David felt a very personal connection with God, and it's almost like God personally handled him, picked him up out of where he was, set him on the right path, and established my steps, sort of urged him along. That's very encouraging, because that's the God that we serve. He wants to be there for you as well. He wants you to pull you out of the miry clay of the rut you're in and establish your way. Hopefully these 3 steps can help you if you ever find yourself stuck in a spiritual rut.